So the first and quite a common mistake is to buy a low quality, no-name, untested power supply. You should definitely not cheap out on your PSU. It is an incredibly important component of your PC. Why? Because it is a common occurrence that when your PSU dies, that it also takes some of your other PC parts with it, often things like motherboards and CPUs. You should also be mindful of the wattage of your PSU. If you really care about correctly speccing out your system, then you can try PC Part Picker's parts list. It will show you an estimated amount of how much wattage your system will require, with of course an additional overhead, in case of GPU's power usage spikes and whatnot. Because of these spikes, you should always overspec your PSU a little. And who knows, maybe in the future you will have more disposable income and decide to buy a power-hungry monster for GPU like RTX 5080. My recommendation is to always buy at least an 80 plus bronze PSU from a reputable brand, like Corsair, Be Quiet and Seasonic. Although Seasonic PSUs are quite pricey, to be honest. By the way, be careful not to mix up PCIe and CPU cables. They almost look the same, except that PCIe cables often have these pigtail connectors on the other side of the cable. These are supposed to be connected to your graphics card. And these are the CPU cables. Their connector is the same on both ends. Also, many PSUs have markings on their cables, which indicate where you should connect the cables. Probably a good idea to look for them. Finally, be sure not to install your power supply upside down. If you have a standard ATX or micro ATX case, then your PSU's fan should face downwards, so that it could intake fresh air. But this of course depends on the model of your case, so take that with a grain of salt. We are now in the age of DDR5 RAM, and with the new standard comes new, well, let's put it that way, kinks. First of all, if you are on an AM5 platform, then you should know what specs are optimal for the CPUs you're rocking. For a Ryzen 7000 CPUs, the optimal RAM speed is 6000 MHz, preferably with CL30 timings, and for Ryzen 9000, 64,000 MHz with the timings of CL32. But if you run an X3D CPU, then this advice might be as well thrown out of the window, because as many of you probably already know, X3D CPUs have lots of L3 cache, and that cache is what gives them an insane performance boost in games, which basically means that your RAM speed and timings does not play such a huge role anymore, but you still probably shouldn't chip out on your RAM and get something like 6000 MHz CL32. But if you do not rock an X3D CPU, then be wary of RAM kits with very slow CL speeds like CL38 and CL40. If you are not going to tune your RAM kit, then timings like this can actually hamper your performance in CPU-bound scenarios, which these days are a dime a dozen. Another common mistake when buying DDR5 is to buy or to later upgrade to 4 DIMMs. Guys, listen, yes, you can make 4 sticks work, but the amount of fuckery that you will have to do and compromises you will have to make are honestly kind of a deal breaker, at least to me. But I'd say that there is a scenario when it does make sense to get 4 DIMMs. It's probably when you primarily need more RAM, maybe for video editing or photo editing, and you do not care if it's not fast enough, because it won't be fast enough, at least for video games. With 4 DIMMs you will have to manually tune your timings and probably settle for lower RAM speed. But if you already decided to get 4 DIMMs, then be aware of how exactly should you place them on your motherboard. Usually your RAM kit is supposed to go into the 2nd and 4th slot. But when you have 4 DIMMs of DDR5, then you should place your RAM kit into the adjacent slots on the motherboard. To be more precise, your first kit goes into the A1 and A2 slot, and your second into B1 and B2. By the way, you should definitely not chip out on the amount of RAM you get. I'd say that most people fit into 3 categories these days. The first one is a casual user, someone who watches movies, works with text documents, and uses their PC for Zoom meetings or something. Sorry, I don't know what people use these days. People like that usually don't build PCs themselves and are better off with a laptop anyway, but maybe you build PCs for them, and those people probably should get 16 GB of RAM. That would be plenty for all of their needs. The second category is of course gamers, and they should definitely get 32 gigs of RAM. Many games these days get bottlenecked by 16 GB, and you have to keep in mind that Windows 11 also chucks RAM, along with your browser of choice, Discord and all other kinds of stuff like game recording software. software. The third category are the professionals who use their PCs for work, and by work I mean something very intensive on system resources like video editing, advanced photo editing, and the very complex VTubing streams with a lot of moving parts. These people should absolutely consider getting 64GB of RAM. They could get away with 32GB, but 64 is just more future-proof and, in my opinion, a better fit. When talking about disk space, my motto is the more, the better. The reason for that is that modern games are so fucking massive that 1TB SSD will get full insanely quickly. If you are choosing an OS drive, then these days I'd say that you should get an M2 NVMe SSD, specifically PCIe Gen 4. The reason for that is that these drives barely cost more than PCIe Gen 3 or SATA SSD drives. And even if in most case scenarios you won't notice the difference between Gen 3 and 4, it's still a good idea to get Gen 4, just for that peace of mind. I would also probably get at least a terabyte module, with the amount of programs that people install, all the shader caching and temporary files, and with a few games, SSD with 500 gigs would get demolished pretty quickly. If you want lots of storage on the cheap, maybe for storing video, photos, local movies and old games, then good old HDD is your choice. These days they are very cheap and they come with frankly unhinged amount of storage, up to 30 terabytes, Jesus Christ. I mean, I don't think many people actually need so much storage, but 2 terabytes or maybe 4 terabytes are very affordable these days. And if you are out of space for NVMe drives and you still need that quickness of the SSDs, then your choice are obviously SATA SSD drives. Most motherboards have more SATA connectors than NVMe, so if you need a dedicated game drive, then SATA SSD are a great pick. But if I were you, then I'd probably only buy them after I'm out of NVMe slots on my motherboard, because they cost about the same. Also be sure to put modern games that support direct storage on your NVMe drives. They do benefit from those blazing fast read and write speeds, making loading screens less of a nuisance. When picking a new motherboard and a new case, you should be aware of a couple of factors. Firstly, there are three main form factors of motherboards and cases: ATX, Micro ATX and Mini ATX. ATX is essentially the standard. These motherboards usually have plenty of SATA connections, 3 NVMe SSD slots and additional PCIe connectors. For those who will want to install something like a built-in audio interface, capture card or M2 SSD extension card. Micro ATX format is a bit smaller and it varies widely in size. There are quite small cases, and there are cases like this big guy who makes me wonder why I even decided to go for a Micro ATX in the first place. Because you see, Micro ATX is like a jack of all trades. It's smaller than ATX, but still big enough compared to Mini ATX. It's one of the reasons why many people prefer not to buy this format. It is limiting compared to ATX, with only 2 M2 NVMe slots and usually only one full-sized PCIe slot. Personally, I do enjoy my Micro ATX system, but I also kinda regret it, mainly because I need a lot of SSD space and I'm forced into buying SATA SSDs. Now, the Mini ATX is quite an interesting choice. It is very small, usually only having one NVMe connector, which is why you should probably splurge a bit more cash on your M2 SSD. They also do not have any additional PCIe connectors at all, only for your GPU. But there is a big community surrounding this form factor, which enjoys pushing boundaries on how small and compact you can get, while still having powerful components. But for all the fun that Mini ATX can get you and its small footprint, it can be quite challenging to plan out and build a PC like that. The problem is of course a space constraint. You have to be mindful of the size of your CPU cooler and your GPU length, and how much cooling you can actually fit in these cases. It is one of the reasons why many ITX builders prefer not to overclock their parts. There is already very little space for the heat to dissipate, and adding some more might be a bad idea. Personally, if I was choosing to build a completely new PC, I would probably go the boring ATX way. I just don't carry or move my PC that often, and the plentiful amount of connectors and wide variety of ATX cases sounds very appealing to me. Oh, and you should definitely consider getting motherboard with built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. You never know when you might need it, even if you mostly use Ethernet. But if you know that you definitely won't ever need either of those features, then be welcome to save some cash. When talking about PC cases, you should generally keep in mind that you should research if your parts will actually fit inside your case of choice. A very common mistake is to buy a chunker of a GPU and then be quickly disappointed by realizing that it just doesn't fit in your case. Always check dimensions, boys, because despite all the opposite talk, size does indeed matter. Also be aware of the height of your CPU air cooler. Some cases are quite narrow, and some coolers are quite well not narrow. This may result in your cooler protruding from your case and you being unable to close the side panel. I mean, yeah, you get more airflow like that, but your components will also kinda drown in dust. Oh, and be aware of the height of your RAM sticks. Some CPU coolers are so damn thick that their fans can block the installation of RAM sticks, especially if they have RGB, cause RAM sticks with RGB are often a bit taller. Oh, and when talking about CPU coolers, do not forget to remove the sticker from the bottom of your cooler. Often people do in fact forget to do that, which results in almost instant overheating and throttling and may even cause your PC to crash. You should also be mindful of how much thermal paste you apply. There is in fact too little and too much. Usually when you apply not enough thermal paste, your CPU will simply be overheating because you won't have sufficient contact between the CPU and the cooler. Applying too much is less of an issue because that definitely won't affect the temperatures of your CPU in a negative way, but it will give you some pain when you will decide to reapply thermal paste or change out CPU, because applying too much thermal paste causes it to kinda leak out to the sides, which can make a mess, especially on AM5 CPUs that will be very bothersome to clean. Usually you should apply a P amount of the paste in the middle, and if you have a spatula, you could also even it out across your CPU. Oh, and be sure to update your BIOS after installing Windows. It is a good practice to do that on a new system, because out of the box BIOS usually comes with a bunch of bugs and security vulnerabilities. Now, people usually don't make too many mistakes when installing their GPUs, but there is still plenty to talk about, I'd say. As I already mentioned before, be mindful of the size of your GPU. It might not fit into your case. Usually you can Google the model, and on the official website, the manufacturer usually provides the dimensions. This applies also to your case. Very rare mistake, but a mistake nonetheless, is to forget to plug your PCIe connectors into your GPU. If you are building your PC for the first time and you are already tired after the excruciating first time building experience, you might forget to plug your connectors in. Also, while not really a GPU related mistake, do not forget to turn on your power supply, or you might have a minor heart attack. When choosing a GPU, you should absolutely go for as much VRAM as you can. The budget models with 8 gigs are just not worth the hassle, assuming of course that you are building a gaming PC. 8 gigs of VRAM is just so limiting these days. You will have to constantly keep in mind your VRAM usage, probably use the lowest quality textures, and even disable hardware acceleration in apps so that they won't eat additional chunk of your VRAM. I honestly believe that you should pay more for your card. Maybe cut some of the costs on your cooling or CPU just to get GPU with 12 gigs of VRAM or more. Well done, your PC is basically ready for CBT, but what about your monitor? This is, in my opinion, one of those important parts that you shouldn't skimp on. You might have the best, most powerful PC in your neighborhood, but what does it matter if you cannot truly see the benefits of it? If you build yourself a more or less modern system, then I think you should go for a 27 or a 32-inch if you like a bigger monitor, 1440p 180Hz display, VA or IPS depending on your preference. VA monitors offer much better contrast ratio and are often curved. IPS, on the other hand, offers much faster pixel response times, which helps in fast-paced games, and they are generally preferred compared to VA. It's just that VA displays are usually more prone to various defects and imperfections like VRR flicker. If you want a more, let's say, unusual viewing experience, then you should consider 34-inch ultrawide monitors. Most modern PC games offer very good support for ultrawides, sometimes giving you an advantage in form of ultra-wide cutscenes, which would otherwise be with black bars on standard 16:9 display. Or if you want the clearest picture, then 4K would be an ideal pick. You would just need quite a beefy GPU and be willing to use upscaling, quite liberally too. Of course, if you are also building a high-end system and have lots of disposable income, you should consider getting an OLED display. They are becoming increasingly more popular, and newer models try very hard to minimize the risk of of burn-in. But it's still a very real possibility. OLEDs are quite new to the market and they haven't been yet stress tested for a long period of time. So if you'd prefer to get a display with more longevity, but also very good looking with proper HDR support, consider getting a mini LED display. But be sure to check out reviews, because mini LED monitors are often hit or miss, often due to their implementation of local dimming, technology that helps them reach near OLED contrast ratio. So, if this video was helpful to you, you learned something new, or perhaps you just had a good time, then I would ask of you to leave a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and maybe sub to the channel. Well then, bye for now.